If you're jumping in on the second episode of this series, I will just update you that you should go back and watch the first episode so you have some context about how I came to the conclusion that I wanted to move to the Netherlands of all places. As a music teacher, I know that the secret to success is preparation. In music, we call this practicing. In life, at least when you're planning to move overseas, it's called research. I like knowing what I'm getting into and being as knowledgeable about it as possible. I also like to do it as cheaply as possible, which, by the way, I've learned is a very Dutch thing. So see, I'm already integrating into the culture. I found a Facebook group dedicated to the DAFT visa, which is the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty from 1954, with a treasure trove of knowledge. I also found some helpful websites and videos about the visa and what it's like to live as an expat in the Netherlands. Then a colleague of mine connected me with a Dutch client of his who also was able to give me a lot of valuable info, including some tips on housing. At first, I looked into working with an immigration attorney. I wasn't thrilled about the cost because, again, I'm pretty cheap, but it would take some of the load off of me for organizing the visa. However, some of the info that I got from the attorney didn't seem quite right, and I didn't feel comfortable moving forward with them. I spoke with a few other immigration lawyers, but the fees they wanted were pretty high, like several $1,000s. Given that there's online guides and I'm going to set up a ZZP, which is like the American LLC, rather than the more complicated BV type of business structure, a structure my business would probably not gross enough money to take advantage of, I decided I'd do the application process myself and opted to download the guide from Katie Temke. According to most everyone in that Facebook DAFT group, it's a really easy process. You just follow the instructions on the paperwork. In fact, you don't even start the visa process until you're present in the Netherlands. The reason for this is you have to have a Dutch address for the government to send you responses to the paperwork on paper. While I could pay for a Dutch address service, the visa process was said to be quite quick, especially since they've gone to a more experimental, ultra-quick response, so I didn't feel the need for the extra expense. The Dutch, I've learned, have a fondness for doing everything on physical paper, generally also with you showing up in person at their office. So having a Dutch address service will only slightly speed the process up anyway. Clearly, their government has not passed a Paperwork Reduction Act. The visa end of things could now be set aside for a while to let me focus on housing. The most challenging part of moving to the Netherlands is finding housing. Some people reported spending months searching fruitlessly for housing and sometimes having to pay many months of rent in advance just to be competitive in the market. The Netherlands, like so many places right now, has a shortage of housing, especially affordable housing. Rentals are tough to come by and small, and especially tough if you have pets like I do and want to practice trumpet and teach music lessons, which is kind of noisy. Houses here are also smaller and crammed together compared to the US with smaller yards, if there even is a yard. The first realtor, which we call makelaar in Dutch, I spoke with said she could find me and my cat something if I could pay around 3,000 euros per month. That was nearly twice what I was paying on my mortgage in the US. However, if that's what it's going to take, then that's what it's going to take. That's when I started thinking about buying a house. The problem is you can't get a mortgage in the Netherlands without a year of income history here. So if I'm going to buy, it would have to be in cash. I don't have that much cash. At this point, it was time to look at listing my house for sale. I didn't want to hold on to it in case I changed my mind, because if I'm going to do this, I'm going to stick it out to the end, and I wanted to sell in case the US housing market should happen to start crashing. I didn't want to deal with renting a house out anyway, and I certainly can't pay the mortgage on a house and expenses on it, plus the high cost of rent in the Netherlands. A friend connected me with a U.S. realtor, Shannon at Fresh Start Realty, who was able to stop by fairly quickly. We had a very good chat and connected on a personal level. Then she told me what my house was likely worth. I've only casually tracked the U.S. housing market lately. I knew prices had gone up in the last few years, but I didn't know that they had jumped so much that I was now sitting on over $200,000 in equity. That changed a lot of things for me. Between that and savings, I had enough money to purchase a modest house in the Netherlands. Granted, it'd likely be in a more rural area and probably need some updating, but I was okay with that. I already remodeled the house I was living in, so what's remodeling one more house? I quickly connected with another expat realtor in the Netherlands, Angelique at Expat Housing Center. My hope was Angelique could view a few houses for me, and I would pick the least worst one. However, it turns out you have to physically view a house in the Netherlands to purchase it. But where in the world am I going to find time to fly over and look at houses? Spring break for me as a teacher this year was the first week of April. I really wanted to spend that time preparing my house to go up for sale, and I'd also just taken delivery of a very large shipment of new Velomobiles and parts that needed to be distributed. But I couldn't think of another time I could get away. However, when I checked plane prices, I discovered that I could find a very reasonably priced plane ticket to Brussels that week. Why Brussels, which is in Belgium and not the Netherlands? Because Zeeland, in the very southern part of the Netherlands, made the most sense from a business perspective, and the housing prices were a lot lower there. My friends introduced me to the Dutch housing site Funda, from which I made a list of roughly 10 houses to view in various areas of Zeeland, and arranged to rent a car so I could get between them more quickly. I wasn't invested in landing in any particular town in Zeeland. For me, since my business is mainly online, any town would work. I'd just go wherever I found the best house. I also consulted a map of the Dutch Bible Belt, a very conservative swath running across the Netherlands. While the Dutch Bible Belt is nowhere near as conservative as the U.S. Bible Belt, I still felt it was important for me to be in a less religiously and politically conservative area. So with that matters settled, it was time to focus now on housing. In the next episode, I'll tell you the story of my trip to the Netherlands and how I sold my house in the U.S., and while the first couple of episodes have been, honestly, not the most exciting, I promise you that the next episode is going to be memorable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in episode 3.